On my 44th birthday, they handed me a cake that said, "Congrats on reaching 300 pounds, my sister toasted." To the family disappointment. Everyone laughed, even my dad. I took photos, grilled steaks, and smiled through it. That night, I cleared out the savings account they all depend on. I, 44M, never thought my own family would destroy me on what should have been a celebration of my life. But there I stood in my backyard, staring at a cake that might as well have been a knife through my chest. The birthday party had been my sister's idea. She insisted on throwing something big for my 44th, claiming family needed to come together more often. I should have known something was wrong when she volunteered to handle everything, especially the cake. My sister had never shown that kind of initiative for anyone's birthday before. When she walked out carrying that oversized sheet cake, I felt the first flutter of unease. The decorating was too elaborate, too carefully planned. Then I saw the writing in bold red frosting. "Congrats on reaching 300 pounds. The numbers seemed to burn into my retinas. The backyard went silent. My nephews stopped chasing each other around the pool. My brother-in-law lowered his beer. Even my elderly mother looked uncomfortable from her lawn chair. But my sister, she was beaming like she'd just won the lottery. She raised her wine glass high and declared her toast about me being the family disappointment. The words hit me like physical blows. What came next was worse than the humiliation itself. The laughter. It started with my sister's husband, then spread to my nephews who were old enough to understand the cruelty. My brother joined in from across the patio. But when my father's deep chuckle joined the chorus, something inside me died. I had been supporting this family financially for over 15 years. When my father's construction business failed during the recession, I stepped in with my savings. When my sister couldn't make her mortgage payments after her divorce, I covered them for 8 months. When my mother needed her medications and Medicare wouldn't cover everything, I handled the difference without question. I had been their safety net, their bailout plan, their reliable source of emergency funds. Yet here they were, celebrating my humiliation like it was entertainment. I forced my face into what I hoped looked like a smile and grabbed my phone. I took pictures of everything. The cake, the laughing faces, my sister's triumphant expression. I photographed the decorations she'd hung that I now realized were subtle digs at my weight and appearance. Every snap of the camera felt like collecting evidence for a case I was building in my mind. When someone suggested we fire up the grill for dinner, I volunteered immediately. Cooking gave me something to do with my hands while my brain processed what had just happened. I seasoned those steaks with methodical precision, my movements automatic while my thoughts raced. The family continued their conversations around me, the earlier incident already forgotten by them. Just another funny moment to remember. As I flipped the meat, I calculated numbers in my head. The joint savings account I shared with my father for family emergencies contained just over $180,000. My personal checking had another $45,000. The investment account I'd started for my mother's potential nursing home care held $67,000. For years, I'd been the financial backbone of this family, and they'd just made it clear exactly what they thought of me. Dinner passed in a blur of forced conversation. I complimented my sister on the party planning, thanked everyone for coming, and played the role of grateful birthday boy. Inside, I was building a wall brick by brick, separating myself from these people who shared my DNA but clearly didn't share my respect. After everyone left, I helped clean up the backyard. My sister kept making little comments about how I should really consider a diet program, how she was just trying to motivate me to be healthier. She wrapped up the leftover cake and insisted I take it home, giggling about how appropriate it would be for my lunches. I drove home with that cake in my passenger seat, like a passenger I couldn't escape. Once inside my apartment, I sat at my kitchen table and really looked at those photos I'd taken. The cruelty was even more obvious in the digital captures. The calculated nature of the humiliation became clear. This hadn't been a spontaneous moment of poor judgment, it had been planned. That's when I opened my laptop and logged into my banking accounts. The family emergency fund took 3 transfers to empty completely. I moved the money into a new account at a different bank, one where I was the sole owner. The investment account required a phone call to my financial advisor, but I explained I was consolidating accounts and needed everything liquid. The process took 45 minutes. By midnight on my 44th birthday, I had removed $292,000 from accounts my family had access to or depended on. Money I had earned, saved, and contributed over the years while they built their lives assuming I would always be their financial safety net. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I drafted emails and made lists. I researched apartment rentals in a city 3 hours away where I'd received a job offer 2 months earlier, an offer I'd declined because I didn't want to leave my family behind. I called the company's HR department and left a voicemail asking if the position was still available. The first call came Tuesday morning. My father needed to transfer money for my mother's prescription refill, but the account showed insufficient funds. He assumed it was a banking error and asked me to check my records. I told him I'd move the money to secure accounts and would need to discuss family finances with everyone present before making any future transfers. My sister called an hour later, panicked because her automatic mortgage payment had bounced. She'd been using the family account to supplement her own checking when needed, with my father's permission. Now she faced overdraft fees and potential late charges. I explained that family financial discussions would happen this weekend when everyone could attend. By Thursday, my brother was calling about the community college tuition for his oldest son. He'd been planning to pull from the family account to cover the semester fees that were due Friday. I told him the same thing I'd told the others. We needed a family meeting to discuss financial arrangements going forward. The meeting was scheduled for Sunday at my father's house. I arrived early and set up my laptop in the living room, along with printed financial statements dating back 5 years. When everyone gathered, the atmosphere was tense. They'd clearly been talking among themselves, trying to figure out what had happened to their reliable bank. I started by thanking them for the memorable birthday celebration and mentioning how much the cake had meant to me. My sister looked confused by the gratitude, but my father shifted uncomfortably in his chair. He seemed to understand that something significant had changed. I explained that I'd been reviewing my financial commitments and decided to restructure how I supported the family. From now on, any assistance would be provided as formal loans with written agreements, interest rates, and repayment schedules. No more automatic transfers or emergency bailouts without proper documentation. The room erupted in protests. My sister accused me of being petty and vindictive over a harmless joke. My brother demanded to know why I was suddenly acting like a stranger. My father asked what had gotten into me, why I was treating family like business associates. I pulled out my phone and showed them the photos from my birthday party. I displayed each image on my laptop screen, letting them see their own faces during my humiliation. I asked them to explain how celebrating my weight gain and calling me the family disappointment represented the love and respect that should accompany family financial support. The silence that followed was different from the silence before the cake incident. This was heavy with recognition and guilt. My mother spoke first, saying she'd felt uncomfortable during the party but hadn't known how to stop what was happening. My father admitted the joke had gone too far, but suggested I was overreacting to what was meant to be harmless family teasing. I responded by reading the loan terms I'd prepared for each of them. My sister owed $23,000 in mortgage assistance over the past year. My brother's son's tuition and car repair bills totaled $8,500. My father's business loan, which had never been formalized, stood at $67,000. All of these would now carry a 6% annual interest rate, with minimum monthly payments required. My sister broke down crying, claiming she couldn't afford loan payments on top of her existing bills. My brother argued that families shouldn't charge family interest on help. My father accused me of using money as a weapon to punish them for one bad joke. I stood up and closed my laptop. I told them they had 1 week to decide if they wanted to formalize these loan agreements or if they preferred to find alternative financial arrangements. I mentioned that I'd received a job offer in another city and was seriously considering accepting it, which would obviously limit my ability to provide ongoing family support regardless. As I walked toward the door, my sister grabbed my arm and asked what she was supposed to do about her mortgage payment that was already late. I suggested she contact her lender to discuss payment options, or perhaps ask the family members who'd found her birthday joke so amusing to help her through this temporary financial difficulty. The drive home felt like emerging from underwater and breathing freely for the first time in years. My phone buzzed constantly with text messages and missed calls, but I didn't respond to any of them. Instead, I called the HR department of the company that had offered me the position and confirmed my interest in relocating. Monday morning brought a series of increasingly desperate messages. My sister had spoken with her mortgage company and learned she had a 10-day grace period before late fees kicked in, but she needed $2,400 immediately to avoid penalties. My brother had found a student loan option for his son's tuition, but it required a co-signer with good credit, something none of them possessed after years of relying on my financial backing for their credit-building activities. My father left a voicemail asking me to call him immediately to discuss reasonable solutions to what he called our current family crisis. The desperation in his voice was unmistakable, and I realized he'd never fully grasped how completely they all depended on my financial contributions until the money simply wasn't available. I waited until Wednesday to respond to any of them. I sent a group text explaining that I'd accepted the job offer and would be relocating within 30 days. I attached digital copies of the loan agreements I'd prepared and gave them 2 weeks to sign and return them if they wanted to maintain any financial connection with me going forward. The response was immediate and explosive. My sister called me selfish and cruel, claiming I was destroying the family over wounded pride. My brother accused me of abandoning my responsibilities to the family unit. My father demanded to know when I'd become so heartless and money-focused. But it was my mother's quiet response that surprised me most. She called that evening and told me she understood why I was hurt, and that while she wished I'd handle things differently, she recognized that the family had taken advantage of my generosity for too long. She asked if there was any way to repair the relationship, not for money, but because she genuinely missed having me as part of the family dynamic. I told her I missed her too, but that I couldn't continue being the family bank while being treated as the family joke. I explained that my decision to relocate wasn't just about the money. It was about building a life where people valued me as a person rather than as a financial resource. 2 weeks later, nobody had signed the loan agreements. My sister had managed to borrow money from her ex-husband's parents to cover her mortgage, but the arrangement came with strings attached that she resented. My brother had enrolled his son in a community college closer to home that cost less, but the boy was angry about losing his preferred school choice. My father called the night before my moving truck arrived. He wanted to know if there was any way to convince me to stay local and work out our differences. He admitted that the birthday party incident had been inappropriate and that they'd all gotten too comfortable assuming I would always be available to solve their financial problems. I told him I appreciated the acknowledgement, but that my decision was final. I'd already started my new position remotely and would begin working in the office the following week. I mentioned that I hoped we could rebuild our relationship over time, but that it would have to be based on mutual respect rather than financial dependency. The last conversation I had before leaving town was with my sister. She showed up at my apartment as I was loading the final boxes into my car. She looked exhausted and older than her years, and I realized for the first time how much stress the financial uncertainty had been causing her. She apologized for the birthday party, acknowledging that it had been cruel and unnecessary. She explained that she'd been feeling frustrated about her own life situation and had taken it out on me in the worst possible way. She asked if there was any possibility of rebuilding our relationship without the financial complications that had defined it for so many years. I hugged her goodbye and told her I hoped we could find a way to be siblings again rather than creditor and debtor. I mentioned that my new city was only 3 hours away, and that maybe some distance would help us figure out how to relate to each other as equals rather than as financial provider and dependent. Update 1. 6 months after relocating, I received a Christmas card from my mother with a handwritten note inside. She updated me on family news and mentioned that everyone was managing their finances independently now, though it had required significant lifestyle adjustments. My sister had taken a second job and moved to a smaller apartment. My brother's son had thrived at his new school and earned a partial scholarship for the following year. My father had restructured his business and was operating profitably, though on a much smaller scale. The note didn't ask for money or suggest I return home. Instead, my mother invited me to visit during the holidays if I felt comfortable doing so. She mentioned that the family had spent a lot of time discussing what had happened and that everyone better understood why I'd needed to establish boundaries. I drove home for Christmas Eve dinner. The atmosphere was awkward initially, but gradually warmed as we focused on catching up rather than relitigating past issues. Nobody mentioned my weight or made jokes at my expense. When my sister served dessert, it was a simple store-bought pie with no commentary attached. My father pulled me aside before I left and handed me a check for $5,000. He explained it was the first payment toward the money he owed me, with interest calculated according to the loan terms I'd originally proposed. He told me he'd been keeping track of the balance and planned to continue making monthly payments until the debt was resolved. I was surprised by the gesture, but more impressed by his recognition that the money represented a real obligation rather than family charity. I accepted the check and told him I appreciated his effort to make things right between us. Update 2. A year after leaving, I had lost 47 pounds without trying. The stress of being the family's financial safety net had been affecting my health in ways I hadn't recognized until the pressure was removed. My new job challenged me intellectually and provided opportunities for advancement that I'd never had in my previous position. I'd also started dating someone I met through work. She knew nothing about my family situation initially, which allowed me to present myself simply as who I was rather than as someone defined by his role as family provider. When I eventually explained why I'd relocated and cut financial ties with my relatives, she supported my decision and helped me recognize that healthy family relationships shouldn't require one person to sacrifice their own financial security for everyone else's comfort. My sister called in March to tell me she'd been promoted to a management position and had saved enough money to make her first payment toward the mortgage assistance I provided. She sounded proud of her financial progress and mentioned that having to budget carefully had actually helped her develop money management skills she'd never possessed before. My brother sent a graduation announcement for his son, who had earned his associate degree with honors and received a full scholarship to complete his bachelor's degree at a state university. He included a note thanking me for forcing the family to find alternative solutions, acknowledging that his son had benefited from the challenge of working harder for his educational goals. Update 3. 2 years later, I received an invitation to my nephew's wedding. My brother had handwritten a note explaining that his son wanted me there despite our complicated family history, and that everyone understood if I preferred not to attend given past tensions. I decided to go, partly because I'd missed watching my nephew grow up during our family estrangement, and partly because I was curious to see how everyone had adapted to their new financial independence. The wedding was smaller and simpler than family celebrations used to be, but it felt more genuine somehow. My sister had organized the reception decorations herself rather than hiring professionals. My father had built the wedding arch as his gift to the couple. Everyone contributed according to their actual abilities rather than relying on my checkbook to create an artificial standard of celebration. During the reception, my nephew approached me to thank me for attending. He told me he understood more about family finances now that he was managing his own money, and that he respected the boundaries I'd established even though they'd initially seemed harsh. He mentioned that learning to budget for college had taught him valuable life skills that he might never have developed if everything had continued being handed to him. My sister and I danced together during the father-daughter dance, since she was filling multiple parental roles for the wedding. She told me she was proud of the life I'd built in my new city, and that she'd learned to be proud of her own financial independence as well. She admitted that being forced to support herself had been difficult initially, but had ultimately made her feel more capable and confident than she'd felt in years. As I drove home that night, I reflected on how different this family gathering felt compared to my 44th birthday party. There was genuine affection and respect in our interactions, rather than the undercurrent of financial obligation that had colored our relationships for so many years. The revenge I'd planned in anger had evolved into something more valuable, a family dynamic based on mutual respect rather than monetary dependency. Sometimes the most powerful response to humiliation isn't retaliation, but simply refusing to continue enabling the circumstances that made the humiliation possible. My phone contained new photos now, images of genuine celebration and accomplishment rather than documented cruelty. The family disappointment they'd toasted on my birthday had become a man who'd learned to value himself enough to demand that others do the same.